Greetings from Grace Ministries at Rafa once again. We're also known as Trinitarian Grace International. Thank you, all of you, for being here. We got some guys in the chapel at Rafa. We hope to be back in person there, hopefully by next week. And we have people all over the screen from different places, from England, Nigeria, and Africa, and Kenya, and as far away as the foreign country of Minnesota. We have two, actually, Todd and Doug, and Ricky. He's not that far away. He's in Puerto Rico, right down here, just a boat ride away. But anyway, Porter, good to see you. Daniel and David and everybody. Peggy from Texas. Go Texas. And Mr. Canoe is off up here somewhere in Alabama. But anyway, if I missed you, I didn't mean to. Thank all of y'all for being here. I really appreciate this. I was thinking about this, and I knew I was getting ready to introduce Doug, but I really, those of you that choose to participate with us in this ministry, it really means a lot, because this is just like a lot of things. This little ministry just started with an idea, and we just kind of thought we'd start meeting and have a little something to help out, maybe minister to some of the guys at the drug rehabs and all that. And it's turned into much more than that, but not too much, which is key. One of those conferences that Doug and I went to a few years back, I think, they were talking about it, Baxter Kruger and Paul Young and others. They said, if you have a ministry, keep it small enough where nobody knows about it, or something like that. But think that one through for yourself. But anyway, thank you for being here. I'm glad we got a good connection today for the most part. And I'd like to introduce one of our pastors, Mr. Doug Johannsen, lives up in Ramsey, Minnesota. You got it, Doug.
Okay, thank you very much. And hope I can get all this done. Yeah, I remember the conversation that Randy talked about. The conversation really kind of dealt with not letting something get so big that it became institutionalized. And not that institutions are bad, but sometimes institutions can become so impersonal that people in the institution pay more attention to serving and preserving the institution than they do on actually helping people. So we always have to kind of be careful of that. Now, I hope you can all see this slide. I hope that you can see it. If you can't, Randy, please let me know, or somebody let me know. I've entitled this message, The Good Shepherd. Jesus defines himself as the Good Shepherd. And we'll go into the book of John for a couple of verses to see that. What does this Good Shepherd actually do with us? Now, many of us have had zero experience with livestock or sheep, especially. But Jesus, in his culture, shepherding was quite common. So he uses that metaphor and calls himself the Good Shepherd. Now, in the book of John, and I'm using the Message Bible, which is a translation done by Eugene Peterson, in John 10 and verse 11, Jesus defines himself. It's important for us to understand that God must define himself. God must reveal himself, and he must define himself. Because if we try to do it on our own, we're just guessing. And when we guess, we come up with all kinds of mythology and wrong things about God. And, there are plenty of wrong things about God. So anyway, here, I should say many wrong things that are believed about God. But here, Jesus defines himself. I am the Good Shepherd. I am the Good Shepherd. And with his audience, that would have brought back a whole lot of references out of the Hebrew Bible. The Good Shepherd puts the sheep before himself. He sacrifices himself if necessary. Now, there's a hymn that we sing every once in a while. I think it's called Amazing Love. The lyrics go something like, amazing love, how can it be that my king would die for me? Man, what a radical contrast that that has with the leaders that we find in most countries today, where leaders in most countries today will sacrifice thousands, if not millions, of their own citizens just so they could keep themselves in power. Here, Jesus puts us first, sacrifices himself if necessary. And that not just refers to his own life, but his time and his attention. John 10, verse 14, again, he says, I am the good shepherd. I know my own sheep, and my own sheep know me. In the same way, the Father knows me, and I know the Father. I put the sheep before myself, sacrificing myself if necessary. And I want to point out, here's what I believe about that. I know there's a lot of argument in Christian circles about, well, who are the sheep that he knows, and who are the sheep that he doesn't know? I believe that we all of humanity are his sheep. It's just that some of his sheep have not yet come to the point to where they know him. That doesn't mean that we are not his sheep, but it means that some of his sheep just don't know him. So he says, I put the sheep before myself, sacrificing myself if necessary. Now, as I think it was Baxter Kruger pointed this out in a study that I heard him do on the book of John, on this particular chapter, he said, we don't appoint him. We don't appoint Jesus as the good shepherd, nor do we vote him in. He simply declares this as the truth of his relationship with humanity. That's what he's telling you. That's what he's telling me. I am the good shepherd. I am your good shepherd. And again, he's not waiting for us to appoint him. He's not waiting for us to vote him in. He simply states that's who he is, a good shepherd. So what does that mean? How does that good shepherd or this good shepherd work in our lives? I retired about 2 years ago, and when I retired, or shortly before I retired, I was asking the Lord, what next? I had been in full-time ministry for 29 years, and before that as a volunteer for, I think it was 6 years. So I've been in ministry for over 30 years. And so retirement is a big deal. It's one of those milestones that everybody looks at and says, what are you going to do? What's going to happen? And I don't know why this verse, Matthew 11, verse 28, stood out for me. I don't remember the day that it clicked when I was thinking about retirement, but somehow it did. And Jesus is quoted here as saying, and I just love Eugene Peterson's translation of this, because it's obvious from the way he translates it that Eugene Peterson had a lot of pastoral experience. He understood what it was like to be a pastor, to be an under shepherd of Jesus, so to speak. And he understood what it's like to be part of a religious organization, if I could put it that way. He understood that. He understood what it's like to be human. So here's Jesus, that as Eugene Peterson quotes him, are you tired, worn out, burned out on religion? Come to me, get away with me, and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me and you'll learn to live freely and lightly. I'm going to go over those verses again, phrase by phrase, because there's so much in there. And I've had 2 years now of really thinking this through. And I'm not done thinking it through yet. I think it's one of these verses that I'm going to keep coming back to again and again and again throughout the rest of my life. So he starts off by asking the question, are you tired and worn out? And I could say, yes, honestly, after all those years in ministry, I was tired and I was worn out. And that wasn't a bad thing. It's just the truth of the matter. I was tired. Our denomination had gone through some really difficult times and changes in our beliefs and practices. We had some things that really definitely needed to be changed. And it was hard to change because those things had been taught so, how can I say it, so convincingly, but those things needed to be changed. Burned out on religion, come to me. That's a personal invitation. He said, if these things are bothering you, come to me. As I have here on the slide, being tired and worn out or burned out in religion. Those things could be oppressive religion. Maybe you're part of a group or had been part of a group that was quite rule-oriented and oppressive and did not allow a whole lot of freedom or didn't allow much, conversation. It could be an addiction because addictions tire you out, they wear you out, they burn you out. Could be a toxic workplace. I'm sure that many of you have had experience with a toxic workplace where the system or the institution itself is so oppressive and it's doesn't really care for you at all. Maybe you've got a boss like that or something else that's causing us misery. So if that is where we are, then he's inviting us. He's inviting us, not the best and the brightest. He's inviting us who are worn out, tired, angry, frustrated, and feeling helpless in our circumstances. Those are the people that he wants, in a sense, in his game. Can you imagine being an NFL coach and putting out there on the front line those players that are worn out, tired, angry, frustrated, and feeling helpless? Well, of course not. You want the best and brightest. But here's what Jesus does. He cares for his sheep. He says, if this is who you are, if this is how you feel, hey, come to me. I'm the good shepherd. He says, come to me. You are the one he is inviting. I am the one who's inviting. He's inviting all of us to have that personal relationship. And it goes much further than just simply reading words on a page. This is a personal relationship. This is a walking, talking relationship. And at first, you may not be able to, quote unquote, hear his voice. And I'm not saying that he always speaks to us in an audible voice, but there are definitely circumstances in which he's had something to do with it. And he's working in your life. And as you walk and follow him more and more, you become more aware of those times and learn to hear his voice and know that he's working with us. The next part says, come to me, get away with me. And as I've already said, we are his sheep. We may not yet know how to hear his voice, but he will help us learn. I'm just reminded of a story. This actually happened in my family. My dad, after I moved away, I went to college and moved away. Dad was on a farm by himself. And a few years later, my wife and I were out on the farm, and she was kind of teasing my dad a little bit about how quiet he was. And my dad was a really, really quiet guy. And he said, well, kind of a sheepish look on his face, said, yeah, I didn't realize how quiet I was until last winter when he was, he would have to go down to the stock pond and chop open some ice so the cows could drink. And he had to do that every morning and every morning and every morning as long as it was ice. And he said, one day I went down there. And of course, this is the guy who has been taking care of these cattle for years and years and years. Been feeding them, been working with them, and they are very familiar with him as a person. But anyway, that particular day, one of the cows bumped into him, and he yells out something. He said something, and he said the whole herd just took off running for the pasture. And he said it dawned on me they had never heard me speak. They didn't know I could talk. And so he said from that point on, I made it a point to at least say a few words around them so they knew my voice. So I think many of us are in that position. If we ever heard Jesus speak to us, we'd probably run for the pasture. So he helps us little by little to learn his voice and to learn his way of dealing with us. So when we look at that verse, it isn't just come to me, but it's get away with me. It's like, hey, this is a real big deal. This is a walking relationship. And yes, he does mean you. This is not a call to religion. This is a call to come to this person named Jesus. Call to come to him personally. And then he says, you'll recover your life. And this was a phrase in this section that I've been spending a lot of time thinking about and asking Jesus about. What is your life anyway? What's my life? Jesus, what is my life now? I'm retired. What is my life anyway? What is it that you've created me for? What is it that I am most fruitful in and doing? And what is it? Which brings up a statement about a fancy religious term called ontology, ontology. It's a word that I took in some of my seminary classes, and or the first time I became acquainted with it. And it was kind of for whatever reason, a mystifying word to me. And it wasn't until just the last couple of years that it really soaked into what the meaning of it is. Ontology is the truth of your being, the truth of who you really are. That's ontology, your ontology, humanity's ontology, the truth of your being versus the way of your being. Now, oftentimes the way of our being doesn't really match up with the truth of our being. And so we need to understand that. You may look at your life and say, oh, it's a mess. But that's not the truth of your being. That's not who you are. The truth of your being, and this may surprise you, and you may not even agree with it, but I'll say it anyway. The truth of your being is that you are made in the image of God. You go all the way back to the book of Genesis, and God says, let us make man in our image. And after he did that, he said, not just good, but very good. So since we are made in the image of God, our ontology, the truth of our being is that we are kind, patient, wise, joyful, generous, and slow to anger, and on and on. All those characteristics that you find of God, since we are made in his image. That is who you really are. And you might say, yeah, well, okay, that's who I really am, but why I'm in such a mess? Well, let's get into that. He goes on to say, I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me, work with me, watch how I do it. Let's break that down a little bit. I'll show you how. I'll show you how. He's a patient teacher. Showing is more than just reading about it. You know, when the most effective kind of teaching is not just, hey, go read a book, or hey, just watch this video. The most effective teaching, I believe, is hearing, seeing, and having hands-on experience. That is where it really gets locked in. And Jesus is very patient, a patient teacher, showing us more than just simply asking us to read about it in the book. If we're not careful, we can make the Bible into an idol. The Bible is about Jesus. The Bible is not Jesus. It is about him. And yes, we can learn a lot about Jesus from the Bible. And I would urge every one of us to continue reading and studying, because we'll learn a lot about Jesus in there. But also, we need to have that personal encounter where we take that walk and that rest with him. Then he says, take a real rest. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Many of us don't know how to rest. Some people are so afraid of silence that they have to have music on all the time. But take a real rest. And the kind of rest that Jesus wants us to take is one that genuinely refreshes us, doesn't stress us out. It doesn't leave us with bills to pay for the next 20 years, but it genuinely refreshes us. Walk with me. Now we have to take, I think, a closer look at this one. Walk with me, not run at a frantic pace. I was part early on in the denomination I was a part of. We're always talking about the gun lap. Oh, Jesus is going to return. We better hurry up and get the work done. We got to hurry. Push. Work harder, not smarter, or work smarter, not harder, but work. Run at a frantic pace. And I know my denomination wasn't the only one that acted like that or taught like that. But oftentimes people, especially in a religious institution, that is, there's this push of getting it done. You're running out of time, getting it done. And it becomes an extremely frantic, stressful place, and frankly accomplishes, I think, very little. The next part is work with me. It's really parallels the one that we just covered. Not work for God or do stuff for God. And how many times have we heard, well, you got to serve the Lord. You have to do this, you have to do that. And especially in some extremely works-oriented or legalistic systems, you're measured by that. You know, oh, you're not much of a Christian because you're not doing much. Oh, you're not much of a Christian because you're not donating a whole lot. What's that got to do with it? Well, if you're works-oriented and doing-oriented, then that's how people tend to measure you or measure your group. He says, work with me. That's a powerful preposition, with. Not, doesn't say work for me, work with me. So work with me. Jesus does all the heavy lifting. And I hope we always know that he does all the heavy lifting. Now, when he says the fields are white with harvest, and he wants us to go out into the fields of the harvest, he's already done the heavy lifting. He's already prepared that harvest. And we go out and pick fruit that practically falls off in our hand. But so much evangelism is an attempt, I believe, to pick green fruit, to push it and push it and push it. Don't do that. Jesus does all the heavy lifting. Work with him, not feel like you're driven for him. Which brings me to, I don't have this in my notes, but I want to point this out. Sometimes people get confused over what leadership is. And I could put it like this. Sometimes a leader or someone called a leader is not really a leader, but they're a driver. They don't lead, but they drive. They keep whipping you, so to speak, and whipping you and do more, do more, do more, keep driving you. And you feel like you're driven and abused. You don't feel like you're being led. And there is a radical difference in the two. So then he says, let me just give you the illustration that brings that to mind. I grew up on a farm ranch, and so I'm kind of interested in that. But years ago, this was back in the 70s and 80s, I used to go to the county fairs and state fairs a lot, and they would have horse pulling contests, draft horses. And I remember one incident very vividly. It was out in western South Dakota at a county fair. And there's a sort of a club, you might say, of guys that have draft horses for show. And they spend a lot of money on these draft horses. And they spend a lot of money on the harnesses, the tackle. And man, you talk about having an appointment with a hairdresser. I mean, they really have worked their horses over. So they are definitely show horses. Well, I want to contrast two different owners of two different teams. There was one guy that, he had a phenomenal looking team, and his harnesses and his that kind of work was absolutely top notch. And his horses, though, they just acted so jittery. They were jumping and kind of hard to control. And when he was trying to back them up so he could hook up with the load, he couldn't even hook the load up himself. He had to have somebody else hook up the clevis. And then when those horses were pulling, he was always yelling at them, slapping them with the reins. And as the load increased and increased, he finally got down to the point, and I'm not making this up, he finally got down to the point where his horses were actually on their knees, scratching and clawing the ground just to try to pull that load. I had to remember, I was angry at that guy. I mean, that guy was abusing his horses. He should never have been allowed to have a team of horses. Contrast that with another guy that, an older gentleman from Newcastle, Wyoming. And this was a guy that was actually using his horses in his daily work. He was a logger, and he would take his horses up in the timber, saw down a tree, and he'd hook the horses up to that log, and he would turn them around, and without him following them at all, they would drag that log down the hill to the sawmill. And when they got to the sawmill, some worker would unhook the load, turn the horses around, and they would walk right back up to where this guy was, and he'd hook up another one. Now, this fellow was wearing a long black coat. It was kind of, just a work coat. And he looked like he was just fresh out of the timber. His horses did not have fancy harnesses. They had work harnesses, just ordinary leather. Obviously, those harnesses were the ones he was using in his work. And when it came time to the way the horses' appearance was, they weren't. They hadn't gone to the beauty parlor, so to speak. They looked just like work horses. Their tails were long, the mane was long, and they just looked like ordinary draft horses. And so anyway, this fellow comes into the arena, and he backs up his horses, and he drops the reins, and he leans down, and he picks up the hook, and he hooks the hook up to the load. He doesn't even need any help. The horses are just standing there very calmly. Then he picks up the reins, and he says two words, the names of both of those horses, and they just start pulling. And eventually he wins the contest. And the ringmaster, or whatever, the MC or whatever the guy is called, he asked him, he said, well, do you want to see how much weight your horses can pull? And he said, sure. So they increased the load and the horses pulled that, and then they increased the load again. And he started the horses up and they went about 10 feet and he stopped them. And the ringmaster says, well, why'd you stop the horses? They were pulling that. And this man said, I will never ask my horses to do anything I know they cannot do. That was absolutely amazing, because he knew that that load, the horses probably could only pull it a few more feet and then they would not be able to. So that's the difference between a leader and a driver. The first guy was a driver. Oh yeah, he owned the horses and he had it all looking good, but he was a driver. He was not a leader. Anyway, just thought that's kind of where I'm coming from, and the different styles of what often passes for leadership. Watch how I do it. Watch how I do it is the next part of that phrase. Jesus does it plainly enough for us to understand and join in. He reaches us at our level. He doesn't come to us as little children expecting us to be PhD level. He doesn't do it that way. He does it plainly enough for us to understand and join in. There's no reason for us to be afraid of that relationship with Jesus. He is gentle of heart and very patient. Now, the next part, learn, take as long as you need. You don't need to get in a hurry with this. After all, God inhabits eternity. And, you and I are not his first rodeo, so to speak. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. There's no such thing as forced grace. I remember when I was a kid working with my dad on the farm, and part of working on the farm was learning how to be a good mechanic. And, there were every once in a while you try to replace a part, and that part seemed to be kind of difficult to put together. And I'll get a bigger hammer and pound it on there. Well, as my dad taught me, look, if you have to force it, you're probably not doing it right. Yeah, there's some things like bearings that need to be pressed on, but in this particular case, no. Just think about it. If you have to force it to make it fit, then you're probably doing it wrong. Jesus doesn't force anything on us, not even grace. He patiently works with us and he waits until we're ready. The way of Jesus' being includes patience. Since we're made in his image, our true way of being also includes patience. You got it. It's down deep in you, but it's there. And maybe we haven't learned how to express it fully yet, but it is there. It is there. Our true way of being, our ontology, our true way of being includes patience, because Jesus is patient. And then he says, I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. And wow, that just strikes me so vividly. How many times have people laid something heavy or ill-fitting on you, and we blame God for it? No, God doesn't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. He's not into shaming or guilt-tripping us. If it's overwhelming and it doesn't fit, then it's probably not from Jesus. No, not even probably, then it isn't from Jesus. So again, I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. That's just the way Jesus does. Now, let me try to explain this to you. I know that each one of us probably has a gift of doing something that when you get in it, you kind of feel like you're in the zone, so to speak. The first time I heard about that, I remember a star basketball player saying, sometimes I get out on that court, and when I shoot the ball, that rim seems like the thing's about 5 feet wide, and I can't miss. I just can't miss. I'm in the zone, so to speak. And I've heard baseball players say the same thing. Sometimes I get up to the batter's box and I just swing away and I hit that ball and it just goes. The golfers do the same thing. And I know for me, I love to do photography. I love to do woodworking. And there are sometimes I will get into the woodworking or I'll get into photography. And yeah, it's difficult, I suppose, in some ways, but it doesn't really seem that difficult. It just flows, and you're really not even aware of time passing. And I think that's what happens when we are in that particular zone where Jesus has laid something on us that is in accordance with our giftedness. So please don't ever, ever think that Jesus is absent in any aspect or at any time in our lives and that we have to go it alone. I'll say that again. Do not ever, ever think that Jesus is absent in any aspect or at any time in our lives and that we have to go it alone. I hope that's plain enough. Then Jesus says, keep company with me and you'll learn to live freely and lightly. And that was another phrase that I have been focusing on the last couple of years. If we do, quote unquote, not keep company with Jesus, that doesn't mean he's not there. He's always with us, especially even when we're not aware of it. We're just not participating in the conversation. If we forget or fool ourselves into thinking he's absent, then we're going to experience the fears that inhabit our delusions. I'll say that again. If we forget or fool ourselves or unaware of his presence and we think he's absent, then we're going to experience the fears that inhabit our delusions. And those fears that inhabit our delusions can be quite terrifying. Your authentic self. What is your authentic self? Well, I think I've covered it already, but let me rehearse it again. Your authentic self is a unique person made in the image of God. Think of your authentic self as a perfect and precious diamond. You were made in the image of God and you were made very good. That's your authentic self. However, in this world, we've come to believe something different that coats this diamond with crud. And some of the crud is, and I'm sure we've either said it to other people, we've contributed to the crud on that diamond, or we've had it said to us, oh, you're stupid. You're no good. You're a loser. You're ugly. You'll never be good enough. I'm sure we've all heard those or said those phrases. Well, that is the dirt and the crud that we heap on the diamond that each one of us happens to be. Well, the Father, Son, and Spirit in you have come to recover the authentic you by washing away the lies and the delusions that hide the image of God in which you were created. You were created very good. You were created in the image of God. And again, think of yourself as a precious diamond or some other precious jewel. That's who you are. Genuinely are. Yeah, we're all covered by a lot of crud, but he's washing all of that away. And that brings about our authentic self. And now to conclude, I want to just read this again. And I ask you all from time to time, read these verses again and again and think them through. Meditate on these verses. Matthew 11, verse 28 through 30. Are you tired, worn out, burned out on religion? Come to me, get away with me, and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me and you'll learn to live freely and lightly. I'd like to just say a quick prayer of thanks. Thank you, Jesus, for always being with us. Thank you for being our good shepherd, whether we know it or not. Thank you for including us. And may our eyes gradually be opened to your real presence so that we can enjoy you more and more and more as we keep company with you. Amen.